Some photographers have told me that they never use lens filters.
And that got me thinking, is this filter actually helping me, or is it actually ruining the quality of my photos?
I never imagined that a lens filter would ruin the quality of my photos, but I needed to be sure. So I shot some sample photos to test some of the common lens filter myths. So are lens filters worth it? Which ones should you buy? And which ones do I personally keep attached to my camera? But before we get to that, the lens filters that I'm using in this video are made by K&F Concept, who I've partnered with to test some of those things and uncover the truth behind some of the common lens filter myths, including one that lens filters are just too expensive.
One of the first filters that I ever purchased was actually this one right here. This is a variable ND filter. Now this is the Nano X Pro version of this filter. The very first ND filter that I ever bought was the Nano X version of this filter. And you can see if you zoom in that it's just beat up. Like, I've filmed helicopters with this. I've gone out, shot landscapes. It's just been blasted. Now this isn't that expensive, but when I got it, I was only using it to film videos, to film these types of videos, and I didn't actually think about the fact that I could use an ND filter to take photos.
This is kind of a two-in-one myth, because as photographers, we can really get away with using a minimal amount of gear, or at least compared to videographers, all we really need is a camera, a lens, and probably a memory card as well. And so what happens is we often neglect other things like tripods or lens filters that for a minimal investment can really enhance or add to the value of the photos that we're capturing.
So what I'm doing here is I'm actually trying a bunch of different exposure times. I feel like anything longer than 2 seconds in this spot is a little bit too long, and really I only need about, I don't know, 1 second to get this streetcar that's about to go by. Are we gonna get it? Are we gonna get it? I think I missed it. I may have missed it. I'm risking my life here at the edge of the street. I think this fire truck's gonna run me over here. It might run me over.
When I was a new photographer, the biggest obstacle that prevented me from investing in lens filters was the fact that I thought they were too expensive. But K&F has some really great options that are all under $100, like the one that I showed you at the beginning, or some of the ones that I'll link down in the description. Or if you're looking for something that's a little bit higher end, they have their Nano X Pro series that I showed you at the beginning that comes with some bonus features like a 2-in-1 CPL. But maybe you've heard that lens filters slow you down, because the last thing you want to be doing is screwing and unscrewing and dropping your filters, and maybe you're in a high pressure run and gun scenario. Well, that is where their magnetic lens filter kit allows you to get a little bit more creative and change things up really quickly.
So the one thing that is tricky if you're shooting in a downtown scenario like this where there's a lot of movement is sometimes the shot ideas that you have can change really fast. Like 2 seconds ago, I wanted to do a shot with a variable ND filter, and then I realized it wasn't enough, so I actually had to pull out a fixed ND filter, and then I had this idea for a circular polarizer, and so because this is magnetic, I can literally just swap it on and I don't have to screw anything. So I could start with a regular circular polarizer. That magnetizes on. Then if I want to switch to something really dark, I can go to ND filter, fixed, but let's say I want a little bit less, I can actually take that off, then grab the variable ND filter, go on, and I'm set up. So super fast.
Some lens filters are a little bit more destructive than others. You've probably heard the myth that lens filters can ruin the quality of your photos. Or maybe you've heard a photographer say something like, why would I put a $10 piece of glass or even a $100 piece of glass in front of my $1,000 or my $3,000 high-end camera lens? And they have a point, but sometimes something as simple as a clear UV protection filter can actually save your $1,000 or $3,000 $2,000 expensive camera lens. And ever since I started photography, a clear UV filter has been what I've kept on the front of my camera lens, because the last thing I want is to get dust or scratches or have the front element on my lens break. And if you're wondering, well, what's the trade-off? What is actually happening when I attach this filter? Take a look at the before. So this is a photo without any lens filters attached, and then here's the photo where I attach the clear UV filter. So I'll let you be the judge of whether or not you think this lens filter is worth it.
Okay, here we go. Streetcar. Please, 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 please. Fire truck. Streetcar. Boom. 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 I think we got it.
This is a very dynamic video.
Taha's behind the camera right now saying it's very dynamic, and I completely agree. Yeah, one like point, not 1 second, but the eight. It's like 3/4 second. Seems to be a good exposure time. This is how we should do all the videos.
Tight spaces.
This is really tight spaces. A lot of photographers believe that you can do all of the effects of lens filters inside of editing, but there's one filter in particular that's really hard to replicate inside of Lightroom or your editing software, and that is one of these. This is a circular polarizer, and it physically changes the reflections inside of your scene. So I'll show you what that one does. One of the uses for a circular polarizer is, of course, that it can change the saturation of the objects that you're shooting. Now, if that's all it did, of course, you could do that exact same effect when you're editing your photos in Lightroom. But the unique thing about a circular polarizer is that it actually changes the light that enters your camera. So depending on how you have it oriented, it will actually cut out certain wavelengths or certain orientations of light. So that way, if you have harsh reflections or a reflective surface and you want to reveal the underlying color, adding a circular polarizer, rotating it will have that same effect, which is pretty challenging to do just inside of editing. So if you're gonna pick one filter that can do something that you can't do in editing, try a circular polarizer. So one of my favorite uses of a circular polarizer is reflective surfaces. So if I show you this clip with Jonathan standing in, you can actually see that as I rotate the circular polarizer, it completely changes the reflections of the car. So in one direction, it's gonna pick up all of the ambient light, all of the light that's hitting the car, and then in the other, it's gonna cut it out. Now this is a little bit challenging because you can't always get the perfect photo. So if you take a photo with one orientation of the circular polarizer and the other orientation of the circular polarizer and combine them and brush them together in Photoshop, that way you can kind of get the perfect photo with all of the color of the car exposed. Although in this case, it is a little bit overcast, so you might want to try using a circular polarizer in different lighting conditions to really get the result that you're after.
Mist filters are another one of those myths that you might encounter. They're a bit contentious because they do permanently alter your photos in a way that some photographers would consider destructive, but other photographers would say is a stylized look. Like in this photo here, where I'm using the Can-F Black Diffusion half-stop filter, which I'll also link down in the description. I did try to recreate this effect inside of my editing software, but I'll put the two photos side by side and let you determine which one you think is better.
So what I'm actually doing right now is I'm shooting at f16, so I can kind of get everything from the foreground to the background in focus. But if I was to do that at like f2.8, the problem is I would be overexposed, even if I went down all the way to f or ISO 100. And so with the ND, I think I've got the variable ND, just an ND32, is when the streetcar comes by at f16, I'll have enough to get the whole streetcar in focus. and get my background in focus. And rather than relying on, depth of field or like an f2.8 lens to create interests and like a dynamic photo, I'm just relying on all the motion, all the people, and just the streetcar going by.
The cool thing about the photo that I just showed you is that it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about lens filters being expensive. But if you think about the fact that you could get the exact same effect that I just showed you on an inexpensive lens, because we didn't need to shoot it at f1.4 or at f1.2, you could shoot at a higher aperture on an inexpensive lens, use a standard ND filter or a variable ND filter, and create visual interest or create motion or create depth inside of your photo. But I want to show you one more example of what's possible when you combine some of the filters that you've seen so far.
There are 3 ways to capture the kind of golden hour sunset skyline scene that's behind me. The first is you just take a normal exposure at 1/50, 1/100. The challenge with that is that the water doesn't always look the best and you get a lot of reflections. So one thing you can actually do is you can grab a circular polarizer to kind of alter the reflections, but the wave texture will still be there if you're shooting at a fast shutter speed. So what I've actually done is I've taken this dark ND filter, popped it on the front, and then I can do a 5-second, 10-second, 30-second exposure and blur out all of the water so it looks nice and smooth. Now, because this is magnetic and you can swap them fast, you can also stack them. So if I want to combine the effects of the ND plus the CPL, I can take the CPL, put it on the front and rotate it. Now, depending on the look that you're going for, you could have more reflections or less reflections, but when you rotate that circular polarizer 90 degrees, you have those options and a little bit more flexibility when it comes to editing your photos.
So hopefully that has convinced you that lens filters are actually worth using and cleared up some of the myths that you may have heard. So until the next one, grab your camera, grab a lens filter, get out, and go shoot photos.